Yeah, I'll drink to that.
You got it in just before it
Oh, did I?
Oh man.
I mean, have there been any reports of people of that actually being enforced, or is it just kind of on paper, this is a misdemeanor, but we're not actually going to enforce it?
Well, part of what's interesting is that there's a lot more laws they know they can't enforce than you'd realize. And so there's kind of a opening the floodgates possibly from doing this I don't know.
Well, I was saying the most interesting thing to me has been like my mom actually is friends with a cop down there and down where she lives in Ohio. And which is obviously not the same as Michigan, but he straight up told her, he's like, no, like I'm not enforcing this. Go spend time with your friends. Like that. And around here, it seems the same. Like everybody's still driving around, and there's cops. Like I feel like they're around a little more than I would otherwise see them, but I never see them actually like talking to people or stopping people or anything like that.
Well, and there's like downtown, there'll be like groups of like 6 people in a circle, all like kind of spaced a few feet apart.
Yeah. Like
not 6 feet like you're supposed to, but a few feet, and it's like. Yeah, I've yet to see cops approach people. What's really a bummer to me is this is just where it's ridiculous. There are a lot of reports of cops going after businesses that are opening or appearing open and questioning, are they really in the exceptions? It's just kind of like this ridiculous, like a bunch of people in the parks, but then the economy, which is the real problem, that's the area we're really enforcing it. Yeah. And it almost just kind of shows how much this whole thing's just been politicized, but between like health versus economics, where if you're on the health side, you're not actually thinking about health, you're thinking about how do I shoot down economics? And it's like, well, that doesn't do anything if people are still spreading it and you're just not working.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you guys have heard about Whitmer being one of the big potential VP candidates.
I think you mentioned that last week.
Actually, that made me feel a little bit better when I heard that, because it like makes the world make a little bit more sense. That like a corrupt politician would do corrupt things to try to get power. Like, okay, that fits into my understanding.
Like I can wrap my mind around that.
Yeah, like I'm 100% serious when I say that. Like, I actually felt a little better.
That's funny.
But,
yeah. The rumors are 28 more days. As of today, that's what I heard. That's a rumor. I mean, we'll see what she does.
Because I read something that said Republicans in the state Senate and House are trying to strip her powers, but it doesn't sound like unless they can get some sort of 2/3 or something like that they can, if she's not going to sign it, obviously. So I don't know how that's going to go, but I guess
I'm curious, like, how did this turn into? First, how did it turn into a Democrat-Republican thing? But also, how did it end up being on these sides? Like, I would have thought Republicans would be a little bit more like, no, we're locking this crap down, and Democrats would be a lot more like, no, this is hurting small businesses, this is hurting racial minorities.
Right, because Republicans are older on large. I mean, I think the second that Trump opened his mouth, every Democrat in the country decided that we need to shut everything down. If you have a mom and pop shop, we're going to burn it. We're not even shutting it down. I think if this virus had started in China, and Trump had said, holy crap, the Chinese invented this virus. This is crazy. We got to lock things down. We'd just be in the opposite. The Democrats would be hardcore, like, guys, no, we got to keep stuff open. It's really important that we,
Well, it's funny because at first it did somewhat look like that because he had stopped travel from China to the U.S. and people were howling over that.
Yeah.
Right.
But then once they realized, like, oh, crap, like, this actually is a big deal, then the lines just got drawn, but in the completely opposite direction. Although you're probably right in that.
Although
open his mouth.
There's still so many questions because I've been banking on the widespread immunity. That's kind of been my hope for a while. Is that basically a ton of us have had it. New York did a screening of like something like 30,000 people. What they found actually was that less people had the antibodies than I had hoped. So it's not like just everybody had it. However, what that test did show. That it showed that like actually not that many people have had it yet. So like there is a lot of potential for tons of people to get it. However, that test showed probably more like a 0.5% mortality rate. So now we're only 5 times the seasonal flu. So that thing's just that. So that's the point where it's like, man, that mortality rate's just plummeting.
Well,
Which,
I was gonna say, because I actually read an article last night that I should send to you guys. I put it on Facebook, but like that was really well done. Like I really appreciated the very like rational, logical approach the guy took. But he actually is arguing and cites some different research. He's arguing even less than that though, and he didn't put I didn't know about the New York study, but he said there was another study, I think maybe in California, that they tried to get broad study, and that according to his numbers, it's even lower than 0.5. I don't remember what it was off the top of my head, but. So I don't know, but my point being just that like it's definitely less than what it was.
see, like that doesn't make as much sense as I'd like it to, because then I look at Italy, which got absolutely hammered by this thing. And I mean, like their hospitals were getting overwhelmed, and it's not like there's some third world country that has 2.5 hospitals, all of which are run down. Like they're a pretty prosperous country with a solid healthcare system. I would think that they, of all nations, would have been well equipped to handle it and not get completely overwhelmed like they did. And so if the mortality rate really is that low, why did they get hit so hard?
Sorry, I thought Kurt was about to respond, so I just paused.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I have not actually seen it justified anywhere that they actually have a good healthcare system. But they also have older population who smokes, so that's a big deal. Also, I've got 25 deaths, and they're pretty hard. They're on the way down. Mm-hmm. So 25,000 deaths. My guess is that that's not that much more than the seasonal flu. The question is, what does seem clear is this thing spreads really fast. So, people keep talking about the hospitals being overrun, and I get that that's a scary scene. But there's a lot of questions I think you need to ask to turn that scary scene into a scenario that demands certain actions. One is, how many of these people would we have saved if we'd done things different, which we don't have a lot of clear answers to. Because, if it's just we would have liked them to die in a bed rather than somewhere else, I really am sympathetic, but it's like, well, then we should be setting up beds. But also let's contextualize what's happening here when we don't know how many of those we could have saved. I don't know. I don't know the answers to all those things, but those would be my thoughts.
Well, and that I think the smoking thing is very significant, because this article that I'm talking about from last night, one of the stats he uses, and again, I don't check sources and all that, but is something like 99.2% or something like that of people who are dying from this have like an underlying, like a significant, not just like they also have the cold, but like a significant underlying
like asthma or something like that.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Or they're, smoker or what. Yes. And like it's not, which is of course not to say, hopefully among these four, this won't be like therefore they deserve it or something. No, but like it's still explanatory. It still gives different, a different understanding than what I think is generally being said.
It is kind of a strange thing entering dialogue with this, though, because I mean, like, if I brought that sort of stuff up to some of my coworkers, it would be immediately like, this is anathema. You can't argue that, because that's going to, because then it's a political thing, which again, it makes sense. Like, this is a big deal, and the health and wealth of the nation is on the line with this. So it makes sense that people would get emotionally invested. But at the same time, it's just like, guys, this is a pretty rational topic that we can all engage with. So I don't know. It's a weird phenomenon to see people get very up in arms over this thing.
As of just now, like as of the last few days, Italy's death toll from coronavirus is just about exactly its normal yearly flu or death. So I looked that up.
Yeah.
And so, and I sent Diego, or I sent you all that thing last time. And I mean, it's like the estimated, that's the big thing, is don't pretend like there's not going to be deaths from the economic fallout. We could easily be talking about 1 million deaths between suicides and health-related deaths from stress and economic fallout. So you're always playing this number game and also the other question I've wondered is, people don't die of old age, right? You die of something when you get old and weak enough that your body's ready to go.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if our actual death rate from the flu will be really, really low this year.
Actually, right now, that is exactly the case. My brother's been tracking those numbers, and he said, like, the flu and a few other very common things are like way down.
Which
which
that could also, the problem with this sort of thing is like it almost becomes just a debate in which there are no ways of verifying, because that could also be explained by, well, yeah, of course the flu is not spreading around. None of us are, in contact with the normal vectors that the normal flu would spread through. Those have been cut off.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at the numbers up through mid-March when we were doing normal things, but you're right.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, what was I going to say? I had a thought and I lost.
Yeah, I just think I think I brought this up last week. The idea of like, what do you consider a natural death? And so, I mean, just statistically, we assume a certain number of people at certain ages die each year from standard illnesses. And so, there's a degree to which, when you call something a non-standard illness, you really should be. I mean, if you want to actually deal at a policy statistical level, you almost kind of have to take, all right, roughly this many people were going to die of something this year, just statistically. Whichever of those people are taken out by something new, we're not going to call that, holy crap, the sky's falling stuff. We're going to call that, okay, this person was like on their last leg, they're 102. If a bee had flown into the room, they probably would have died. I mean, they've had a good life. That's how it goes. If it's this rather than that, that's not crazy. And so I think when you account for that and the death rate we have, I bet you we kill more from the economic fallout at this point.
Well, so that was my thought a minute ago, was that from a mental health perspective, I'm not meeting with thousands of clients, but those that I am, it is very, very clear that the the mental health toll is hitting, and it's just starting, and it's going to continue lasting. I have been blown away actually by people who, like, I have one client in particular who is so typically on any side of the more, I don't know, progressive understanding of things. And she was just like last week, she was like 100% quarantine and like everything, you know what I mean? Like that side of things. And I just talked to her this week and she's just like, no, I need to see people. Like she had somebody stay at her apartment because of a circumstance. She's like, I'm so glad that happened. I needed that so bad, like, and it's like, that's blowing my mind that like we're realizing how desperately we, not just to see people through screens, but to actually be in the presence of another human being, and that the lack of that causes like significant damage. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah.
It has brought to mind how horrifying prison is.
Yeah.
And granted, like in prison, you do have quote unquote community. Like especially the like, imagine the horrors of solitary confinement.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
I always thought like, oh, if I ever went to prison, that'd be my top priority: get to solitary confinement, get out of that crap. But then realizing like, no, there's a reason they use that as punishment, because for like 12 hours it might not be terrible, but like as the days go on, it starts breaking you down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the long-term response is to it, because one of the weird things about this is that a lot of the people driving these decisions and discussions, namely healthcare workers and politicians, aren't confined. And so that's one thing that will be that's kind of weird about it, is like, a lot of healthcare workers are definitely like more susceptible to disease, which I'm sympathetic to. They're having hard, long hours, which I'm sympathetic to, but they're not experiencing what they don't have the fear of the economic fallout or the isolation to interact with.
Yeah. I think that's the point.
Yeah, I would be more inclined to listen to the healthcare professionals, though. The politicians, that's the one where I just go like, yeah, you guys, in this particular case, you guys just have no connection with reality. Like your jobs aren't on the line for this. Like you could have the most medieval laws concerning like everyone stay in or stay at home orders, and you wouldn't bat an eye, because your job is totally fine. So that one I get a lot more cynical with, or at least with healthcare professionals. They're also experiencing the weight of the opposite side of it. If stay at home didn't, or if we suspended stay at home, like they at least would be dealing with that. So they actually have consequences for their decisions, whereas it seems that politicians just don't have consequences in this case.
So I mean, I'm more sympathetic to the fact that they're actually doing something to help, but I actually think that that's what makes it problematic is that they're sympathetic, but they only see one side. Um, I really mean that. Like they're obviously more susceptible to disease. A lot of doctors are older and have a lot more to be afraid about, and so it's like, yeah, there should be respect there. But I know I've talked to a lot of healthcare professionals. It's like their job, their vocation is, it's to a hammer, everything's a nail, is saving lives. And so it's kind of just get lost in those numbers, no thinking of quality of life. The idea of economics is just extremely foreign to that field. And so I see a lot of harm there of like just kind of viewing them as they're the experts on this issue. The problem is this issue isn't just a health issue. This is an everything issue. When you're talking about shutting the economy down, that's not the kind of matter that you can just have healthcare people dictating, which tends to have been what happened. Is nobody's like interviewing the economist for the New York Times right now. Nobody's talking to, nobody's asking healthcare or mental health professionals like, hey, how many people are about to shoot themselves? It's like, well, no, this is a medical issue, and it's like, well, it's not when you told everybody to stay home. Mm-hmm. It's a both issue. Medical's obviously huge, but.
I mean, to be fair, quite a few economists have written opinion pieces and such. I'm not sure if New York Times, but I've seen quite a few floating.
Well, they've written it, but nobody, they're not being viewed as the experts on this issue, right? It's because this issue so far has still just been framed as a health issue.
I see.
Like you're not seeing those as like headliners, right? In big newspapers or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't heard about your week, Diego.
Yeah.
Good. Busy actually. So it turns out that once you break quarantine once, like most boundaries in the world, they tend to break again. No, I mean it's not been that big of a deal, but I mean, I'm still working, actually more. I've had several of my clients that like backed out when we went to all video have been like, this is part of what I mean when I say it's getting worse. Like I've had several of them text me and be like, I need to talk to somebody. Can we please talk? So that has been increasing. Thankfully, the day job has actually gotten a little easier. I'm not exactly sure why, but it was like really bad for maybe like a month. And then now it's hit a plateau or maybe even kind of a downward. So that's been very nice. But yeah, and then we spent the weekend with some people from church, and then Stephen, do you know Anastasia and Gregory? No, I don't think you would.
I know Anastasia and Michael are good friends. He's mentioned her before, but I've never met her.
So her and her husband, and they have a little baby, came over for dinner last night. So that's what Austin made the sauce for. So we saw them. We're going to go over there actually and see them tomorrow. So like, my mom, I talked to her on Sunday and just for like a half hour, and she was like in tears because she missed us so much. And that's not like her. I know some moms are like that, but that's not her. I often go like, I often go, 3 or 4 months without seeing my mother, but just the whole thing, and she lives by herself. And so like, she just really hit very hard. And so I invited her to come up on Saturday and stay with us because like, it's clear that that's the best decision that we can do right now. So, and Austin's girlfriend's been around a fair amount. She came back from California. So that part has been very good. And like, but it's been interesting to hear, and this part still blows my mind. Like I want to spend more time thinking about this because I think there are like more implications than just what I'm about to say. But like the number of people that have told me, well, one, that in the last week or so they broke quarantine, and that they didn't for like a month or so. But you know what I mean? That we're reaching this point where if we have any natural ability to self-isolate, it's breaking down on a broad scale, like very much so. And so that's been interesting. But I
wonder if it's correlated with spring. Like spring is now breaking.
I don't doubt that, but also at the same time, the weather over here anyway, the weather has not been conducive to that.
Right.
The holidays, right?
Yeah, possibly the holidays. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know a lot of Orthodox people were just, all the bishops were like, no, you're not allowed to have church. And we all broke the rules, in some ways.
Diego, I'm curious, did your priest do like any service at all, like even from their house?
so the bishop allowed him to do the liturgy services, like the Eucharist services from the church, and he had his whole family. Obviously, he has a huge family. There were like 8 of them, so they were able, like, his daughter and son-in-law are like the choir, and so they were able to put on a full service. We probably had it better than most Orthodox people.
Yeah, ours were required to not do the service at night. Or like to not have the church at night. At first, it was going to be you can have the service. It has to be bare bones, like only 4 people in, and you have to have the doors locked, and you can't open them for any reason. Yeah. And then eventually, even that was nixed, and it's like, no, you can stream from your house, but that's it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Ours went a little bit the opposite direction, where the bishop is super strict about, like, only the priest family can be there, like, ever, like, at all, and they can only do these services. They're not. Most of them have to be through Zoom, and we did a lot of them through Zoom. And but then. And this is kind of, if you know Father Joshua, this is kind of how he is. Like, the rules started getting bent a little bit more, and we didn't have actual people in the church, but, like, for example, the guy who does all this, set up all the sound and video equipment, like, he would go in and set that all up, and then he would leave, and then the priest and his family would show up, and so that's kind of how it ended up. Nobody's supposed to know that, by the way, so don't repeat that. But, like, things like that. Yeah. But anyway, the point is, it ended up being really good. The part I was getting at a minute ago is that the number of people I've talked to that have described the first time they saw another person outside of their, like, quarantine zone, whether that be just by themselves or their family or whatever, the first time, like, in person, which actually, incidentally, for me, that was Brent Klein.
Oh, really?
He came to my house to drop something off, like, church related, and I went downstairs, and 2 things happened. I felt this tension just drain out of my face, like, almost literally, like, like water running down my face. It just drained. And then I reached out my hand and to shake his hand, and he just looks at me and he goes, "Oh, are we doing this?" And then, grabs my hand and shakes my hand, which I felt bad about later. Cause, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But that description of the tension, like, the way that, even though, like, I've been with my brother this whole time, it's not like I've been alone, right? But the way that just, like, I can't go be with humans. It just built up. And I have had so many people give that exact same description to me. And that's very interesting. Like, that your body itself needs to be in physical proximity to other people. You know what I mean? Like, that blows my mind.
Living some greatness communicated through embrace, right?
What is it? I missed it.
My TED Talk.
Oh, yeah. A while ago, but yeah.
You wanna give us a summary, Diego, and then start us off? Yeah, because this is a great topic, and we're already 40 minutes in. So
yeah, let me, just to make sure I touch on everything, pull up the email real quick.
Yeah,
Liv's thinking about his viewers.
Oh yeah, rate and subscribe.
Like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell button.
Yep. If you visit Patreon if you feel like providing support.
Just $1 a week.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, did he just leave?
He said he wasn't interested anymore.
Yeah, that I figured he would say that eventually.
He's I think it's just water. Just get water. Just water.
Okay.
Not vodka.
Are we? Yeah. Okay. So let me start by saying this. One, actually, I don't consider myself an expert on utilitarianism and kind of that side of things.
You're not missing out on much.
Well, I know that, but actually, I was going to say I'm going to rely on you, Stephen, a little bit, because I know you've studied it, at least formally, a little bit more, or actually quite a bit more than me, and probably more than any of us. Though I don't know your background, Liv, but so I would appreciate some support as we go in that direction. But generally speaking, the idea, I was, like I said, I was kind of like processing this and wanted to, just think about something that was really meaningful, I guess. And so I was approaching it the way Peterson talks about. I wanted to think of, like, what is actually a problem that's been on my mind, right? What is something that I can't figure out and that I would like to try to figure out together, or at least gain some ground on. And so this, actually, I originally wasn't going to tell you what gave me the idea, but I will now. So one of my favorite shows of all time that I just recently rediscovered on Hulu. I'm a little bit ashamed to admit that it's one of my favorite shows, but it is. It's called Seventh Heaven. We're this really cheap cheesy show with with about a pastor and his family. And hey, I'm watching through it again right now, and I absolutely adore it. It's just
Jessica
as good
Biel
as
is hot.
yes, she is. She totally is. Yes. So anyway, I was watching the show, and Reverend Camden in particular, the main character, the dad, right? He stuck out to me, and I remember when I was a kid, he stuck out to me as well. I love how he gets involved, and he takes, in Peterson terms, he takes responsibility for those around him, for himself, for his family, and then obviously the broader community and the church that he runs, right? And he was just getting involved in this person's life who got pregnant, and the family, the dad wasn't sticking around and that type of thing. I was watching this, and I was having this like weird dilemma inside myself as I was watching this and supposed to be working. The dilemma was what I feel like I've learned in more recent years, honestly, a lot from Orthodoxy and Father Joshua in particular, is that like being a Badinsky is like one of the worst things that you can possibly do, right? Like getting in, like involving yourself in other people's business, especially repeatedly and without being asked, right? It's like a bad thing, bad for your soul, bad for the people that you're Badinskying, so forth, right? And that's kind of more the side I've gravitated towards. But my base personality that I think Kurt or Stephen would is not that that I tend to talk and to ask questions and to get involved, and when I'm at a a better emotional state, and I I got that a little bit from the show when I'm watching it as a kid. I've watched it ever since I was like 12 or 13 years old, and so this dilemma presented itself to me, like wait, I like this character, and I actually want to be like him, but I also feel like I am not supposed to. And so the problem becomes kind of the way I worded it in the food for thought section. And I'm kind of starting from the big picture and breaking down a little bit, but like that quote, right? The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. The first time I ever heard that quote was Reverend Camden says it in the show multiple times. Like that's one of his big things, right? And I remember that hitting me when I was a kid and sounding like, yes, this is definitely the truth, and it relates to Spider-Man, right? It relates to Marvel's with great power comes great responsibility, right? There's a connection there, and so that really resonated with me when I was younger. But like, as I've processed a lot of this stuff now, and even thinking about the COVID-19 stuff and a lot of the issues that I would tend to criticize like progressivism for, they tend to champion that idea. Like that idea is something that people who subscribe to those beliefs like imbibe. They think that is like the highest truth that you can believe, right? Or something like that. That if you were to stand there and do nothing, right? When evil is prospering or something like that, you are failing. You are morally evil if you are doing that, right? And actually, I've heard people say that you're pretty much the same as the person perpetrating it, morally speaking, right? And that I don't know that any actual philosopher has said that, but people say that, right? Where was it going? So I guess what I wanted to start doing is I wanted to start researching that quote, and I found that one website. I don't know if you were able to look at it at all, but like it was really cool how it kind of broke down the history of the quote itself, and then what I wanted, and is exactly what it gave me, is a link back to the ideas of where it comes from, right? And so the earliest mentions of something similar to the quote, and you didn't really need to look at these sources; it was just the quotes that were actually shown in the actual article itself, but the sources come from Edmund Burke and John Stuart Mill, Stephen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just have it.
If it came from John Stuart Mill, yeah, I can't confirm that, but I can confirm that is his name.
No. It is, yes. I will confirm that it is linked to him. The name of the part that I was forgetting.
I can't confirm where the quote's from, but I can confirm that Stephen did confirm that is how I pronounce their names.
I'm glad that we have that covered.
So one thing, I was just surprised that you didn't reference James as James chapter 4. If anyone knows the good that they ought to do and does not do it, it is sin unto them.
Good. We'll just pretend that's on there. Good idea. But yes, right. So this is the idea. And so at least according to this article and from what I could find, it traces it back to Burke and Mill as some of the earliest, at least publicly, who were putting this idea forward, right? And Burke is interesting. I don't know much about him, but the Wikipedia article that I quoted talked about him being considered one of the fathers of conservatism, which I found interesting. And then obviously Mill is connected to utilitarianism, among other things. And so that's why I also included the article on utilitarianism, just to get, well, for myself and for all of us to get kind of a basic idea. So Stephen, right, this is where I would like you to correct me if I say something wrong, but utilitarianism just being kind of very oversimplified to say the greatest amount of happiness for the largest number of people.
Yep.
Okay. Anything to add, I guess?
I mean, in some cases, maybe swap out happiness for like goodness, whatever that may be, but good or happy or whatever you're trying to maximize. Yeah. Utilitarianism says maximize that.
Okay. Yeah. And I get this from some different people that I've read, but like I have come to believe over recent years that like the general like idea undergirding our society seems to be that. Like it does to me. And so I obviously these things are connected, and you can see how they kind of work together. And so that's the one side of it. And so again, what was interesting to me is even as I was putting together this email, like I don't like that side. You know, I felt my own prejudice, right? But what started this questioning in the first place is that I was watching this individual character in a show do good things, involve himself, and that at least in the show it was working well. But also I can think of like people in real life that I know that are more like that than I am, or more like that than most of the people I surround myself with. And it also tends to be good. It tends to work out. It tends to not be like a selfish or Badinsky or whatever thing. And I do find that inspiring. I find that like something that my heart looks at and wants to mimic, to, you know, to what the other word, to do it too, you know. And so anyway, so that's kind of that part of it. The other part, so in Lent, in Orthodoxy, you say the prayer of Saint Ephrem like over and over and over and over again. And I have always loved it. Ever since I first heard it, like for some reason, it hit me very especially. And I think it was always specifically the Indeed, O Lord and King, grant me to see my own transgressions and not to judge my brother. Like for some reason, like for some reason that tends to hit me harder when I read it that way, and when I'm actually praying that in a service, than that concept, right? The concept is not new, but then the concept ever had hit me before. And something about that, like, and my priest is really good about hammering this point every time he talks in Lent as well, that like the whole point of Lent is to get you to look inward and to not be watching other people. And for those of you who do know me, I have very strong emotions, and they often react to circumstances and people and things, right? And so like that's why that hits me so hard, is because it like it makes me realize that all year long that's what I'm doing, is I am judging in the sense of like I'm assigning some sort of emotional value to the actions of people around me and getting really pissed off about it or whatever, as opposed to like trying to take responsibility on myself and for myself, right? And so like that idea seems in some sense counter, sorta. I mean, as I develop it more, you'll see why I say that, but like counter to the other side, the only thing necessary side, right? So then I started doing some more research and trying to figure out if there were other philosophers that talked about it, and I really wanted it to be Plato. So because I really wanted to bring Plato into this, and lo and behold, I think the section that I found from the Republic, like it gets at what I'm getting at in a really cool way. So I'm going to try to summarize this, because like the Republic is so huge and whatever. But right. So Plato is spending the whole Republic, and feel free to jump in, Stephen, or anybody. But Plato is spending the whole Republic kind of building the ideal city, right, or something like the ideal society, while at the same time building like the ideal conception of the human individual, and kind of like doing that in a parallel sense, right? The book is not about one or the other. The two are very closely connected for Plato / Socrates, right? And so what we're coming to at the end of book 4 in the Republic is kind of like his summary of a significant part of what he was getting at, and that is kind of a definition of justice, right? And so the part he has established earlier that I didn't have you read is that justice in the soul, in the individual soul, is to take the three parts. So for Plato, there were three parts of the soul: the more appetitive, the spirited, and then the right. He says it in the thing, and then the rational, the reasonable, right? And that each of those parts of the soul is necessary and good, but it becomes not good and unjust when it kind of gets outside of its own boundaries, when it starts invading the other parts, the things that are the responsibility of the other parts of the soul, right? And so to keep the soul in harmony, which I thought was really cool, considering that we were talking about music at like either one or 2 weeks ago, right? That he uses that as his metaphor, right? Like a chord that just plays beautifully when they're in harmony, like those three parts, right? And then he also broadens that, right? That justice in the city sense is one going to be, I mean, he kind of equates these parts of the soul with these three classes in society, and that they would be in harmony as well, and not like trying to rule the parts that are the responsibility of the others. But more so, what he's getting at in the section that I sent to you guys is that like, hold on, I have to think about how to word this. It is vital to the general well-being of everyone that each individual looks to his own soul first, right? And looks to manage his own issues and own like area of influence first. And actually to do anything other than that, he uses words like, I can't remember now, but like words like rebellious, right? When he's talking about the vice section, and words like meddling, that was one of the words he used, right? That like just by doing that, even if the thing yourself isn't actually like a vicious thing, like you are bringing about vice. Both like, again, if the parts of your own soul are doing that to each other, and if the society is doing that to the other people in the society or the other classes or whatnot, right? And so I felt like that was gave a good kind of philosophical presentation of what I'm getting at. And then obviously Jordan Peterson, right? So a lot of this has been in my head because of him. I read through Rule 6, which actually was the first time I read it, and just got that section at the end. I thought he did a really good job, kind of succinctly putting it in a way like Peterson does, that like all of us can kind of, I don't know, engage with and relate to a bit better. But right, and I like also how Peterson is in this section, just he's more so asking questions. Ironically enough, he's being Socratic a little bit more so than Socrates is. He's just asking these questions, right? Perhaps if we did this, it would, we would actually take responsibility for ourselves and fix ourselves, right? And then perhaps, right, and he kind of just builds it out from there, starting from the center and building outwards, right? And then obviously, I this quote popped up randomly on Facebook, actually, from this Orthodox priest that I really like. And this was recent. It was his response to the coronavirus thing, right? And again, it's not like I've never heard this before, but for whatever reason, and especially because it popped up during Holy Week, like it speaks to me differently. And all of these things I believe to be saying, not by any means that like you're not supposed to help people, that you're not supposed to like try, to be involved in the world or anything like that. But what I believe them to be saying is you absolutely must take responsibility for your own soul first. You absolutely must, if you're going to use that quote above and consider that like your life quote or something, right? The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. The emphasis, the italicized part of that sentence has to be the good men part, right? That until you are sure that you got the good men part down, you need to be be very cautious with the rest of that sentence, right? And obviously, humility would demand that you're very cautious even about getting the good men part down, or believing that you do anyway. And so that's that's what brought me to my questions. I want to define triumph of evil, right? Like what does that mean in the context of the quote, or at least like when most people say it, what are we thinking about? How are we thinking about it? Good men, like I said a second ago, and then doing nothing, right? Like, because the reason I put that one in there is because, at least in my conversations with people, or just my readings of social media and other things, the idea that you would like work on yourself is often equated with doing nothing, that you're not actually helping the world. You're not actually serving the world, right? And that's why I want to define do nothing, because I obviously don't agree with that. I don't think that's a good way to put that, but and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not how most people think of it, but that's what it seems to me. Um, and I'm focusing a lot on definitions because I'm trying to take my leaf from the book of Socrates. Defining words is like the best thing that you can do to get some sort of precision or understanding. And so, yeah, like, what does it mean to help others? Like, what does it mean to take responsibility for the suffering of the world? What are we supposed to do, in other words, in response to the suffering of the world? Where, like, if, and I don't know if this is actually the right way to put it, if it's like a matter of trying to find a balance of like what, or maybe this is a question that actually, is it a matter of trying to find a balance between like, trying to take care of your own soul on one side and trying to serve the world or whatever, or not, not let evil triumph on the other side. Like where is that middle ground? Or is that the wrong way to conceptualize it in the first place? Is it a hierarchical thing that like you're because even according to that quote from the priest, like he says, there is no greater accomplishment worked in a human being than to be saved, right? Every other human good flows from that, right? So he's stating it in like very strict terms. So that's a hierarchical thing, right? You take care of your own soul, and then goodness will only flow from that. Like if you don't, there will be no goodness that flows from that, right? And so it's not even a matter of balance in that sense. Or is there some other better way to conceptualize it? And then obviously, like getting at the turn inward mentality part. Is that selfish? Because I feel like, and maybe I misinterpret, but I feel like according to the general rule of our society, it is thought to be something like selfish, or something like at least a lesser good than actually going out and fighting oppression and that type of thing. And so if is it selfish or isn't it, and why or why not, right? So anyway, that's my summary. So.
That was good, Diego. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure all of us have too many thoughts at this point, so that's the mark of a good topic and a good summary.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll start out with another framing issue that I just was thinking, and then I think you kind of came to the same point already. But I think what I come to, because I think there's probably several points that most of us generally agree on. Maybe not, so somebody can bring those up if they don't. But I think the idea of basically you need to have your house in order before you help anybody else. I think we're all probably on the same page with like, yeah, the problem with this quote is that like, well, there's so many things wrong with the quote, but it's mostly propaganda. All that evil needs to succeed is good men do nothing. It's like, well, yeah, or good men sucking at doing things, or that they get tricked, or they can't organize themselves well, or they're just bad at fighting evil. Probably a lot of things that could go wrong. But point being, so we all would probably agree that you look inward to, quote unquote, like kind of check your motives or see if what you're doing is right. And then you somehow address the world. So at least that there's this order of self and the world. So the question that came to my mind, I feel like maybe the quintessential question is there a separate, distinct action of turning outward from the self, or is that the same thing? So the quote you said at the end is it flows out of you. So the question becomes like you focus on yourself, make sure I'm not the problem, teach myself to be wise and see things correctly. And the question is there a distinct turning to the world, or does it flow out of you?
Yeah, gotcha. Like as long as you're doing that part, then good is already flowing out of you, right? Is that the idea?
Well, or that a lot of the difference between the Budinsky and a lot of our good examples are whether you're out looking for trouble or it's coming to you. I think if you're living an engaged world, an engaged life, you're going to run into so many people. So I think there's something in being isolated. And isolated is different than self-centered. So maybe there's something problematic about being isolated. But I think if you're just living a normal life, you're just going to run into so many people. Things are going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so it's like if you're that person, then it maybe just flows out of you in those contexts. I don't know.
Okay.
Or do we think there's a distinct turning outward?
So to answer for you, Kurt, two things. The first is that Plato clearly doesn't think that there's a difference. That's the whole point of when he says we're going to try to find justice in the man, but the problem is we can't find justice in what it means to be a single man because it's too fine and narrow. So that's why he does this. Let's find justice in the city because that's going to be the metaphor of what it is to be a just man. Because it's like I don't want to. I don't have a magnifying glass yet or something like that to look at it in a human. That's why we need to look at justice in a city. And then you can take the allegorical, you can take the metaphorical and bring it down to how you act individually, because that's supposed to be the same for Plato. Additionally, Jewish understanding, the word repentance doesn't actually mean, so most Hebrew words have they're word pictures. They have a tangible action that's associated with the abstract concept. So the abstract concept of repentance literally is just turning around. That's what that means. It's actually the process of changing your direction, making a 180 and going the opposite way. That's repentance. It's not necessarily saying, I'm a sinner, I've done wrong. Jewish people would just say, no, acting the opposite way is the repentance. Which actually I think works really well with the Orthodox, the priest, Father Andrew, Father Dominic. Yeah. So in that sense, part of the problem, my guess is the people that agree with the quote in the beginning are going to think that turning around, or think that acting in a that you as an individual focusing on yourself and that focusing on the city or focusing on your greater community are different things. They're the people that are going to agree with the quote. That's inherently what's going on. And for you as an individual, if you think that those things are enmeshed, that's when you disagree with it.
Wait, which quote? Sorry, which quote?
The very first quote. The only thing necessary. Okay. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. I have a feeling if you think that the way that if justice in the city and justice in the individual are different, if there is a different way that you orient yourself towards each of those tasks, that's why you agree with the quote.
Yeah, gotcha.
Does that make sense, Kurt?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
To Kurt's point on it being a propaganda piece, and to tie in with Livingston, I mean that it is used because like it just flows naturally because it's used as a kind of a nice cattle prod, as it were, to keep people moving and keep that idea flowing outward. And so instead of just work on yourself, become a good person, that's not going to get the idea propagating. You need to give people an onus to get that idea back out, and so it does become a propaganda piece, and that is why it's such a good propaganda quote. Not to say that the quote is entirely bad. I would simply modify it. The only thing necessary for evil to exist is for good men not to exist. To Diego's point, if everyone would just kind of concentrate on themselves and become better, then evil wouldn't exist. But even in a less than ideal situation in which some people are just going to be not good, they're going to be doing evil things, the good person won't do nothing. Like if you've practiced the virtues and you see somebody mugging someone, you're going to go help because you've practiced the virtue of courage. If you have become a good person, you've practiced the virtue of charity, you're going to go give to your local food bank.
Yes.
I need to practice virtue of charity because I forgot that. Oh wait, no. Okay, I think it's the 24th. Just a second. Let me double check.
Steven's compassionate international child just starved to death.
Okay. It's tomorrow. Okay, it's typically on Thursdays. My church does that, but thankfully, okay.
Your church does what?
We help out at the local food coach shop.
Oh,
okay. So I would say that if you are working on yourself and you are becoming a better person, then the quote will come true. It's just you don't need to go do something. You need to be a good person, and by being a good person, you will do something. Which I've also found this quote I haven't heard a ton in kind of the more liberal spheres or what have you, but I mean, I found that most people that would use this as kind of a weapon for the more propaganda, social justice stuff. I mean, I found that their version of like doing something is going to a rally once a year and talking a ton about how, you know, social structures are bad or whatever.
Awareness. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why it's a good propaganda piece, is it propagates the idea. It's just used as the vessel for the idea.
Well, and like most propaganda, it actually skips the difficult question, right? Pro-life tells you what to think. Pro-choice tells you what to think. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, so propaganda is always geared at skipping why the question is difficult.
Yeah.
And so why, you know, how do you motivate a bunch of people to slaughter a couple million Jews or throw everybody in the gulags? You tell them all that the bourgeoisie needs to succeed is for us to do nothing. You get them to skip the question of, what should we actually do? That's the real question in life, is like, what's the proper response when things happen or when things are just good? And to say, well, all that evil needs is for you to do nothing, you're kind of saying, like, do you want evil to succeed? Then do what I tell you. Don't think about it too much, because that's doing nothing, you know? So.
Yeah. I mean, in essence.
Well, yeah. So then I guess maybe my problem with the quote more so then becomes that, because I think just from what's been said so far, the idea of there being a proper order to a number one and then a number two seems like vital, actually, to actual goodness happening. That you, like, the emphasis has to be on the you taking responsibility for yourself, because otherwise there actually isn't going to be good flowing out. And so I guess maybe that would be my point. I think that the emphasis that there's, like, maybe nothing wrong with trying to encourage people to, like, you know, if they recognize evil, to try to do some good or try to respond to it in a good way. But the emphasis still seems like it would need to be on, like, but make sure, like, all the other times, because, like, for most people, most of the time they're just going about their business, right? Like, all the other times you really need to be, like, taking care of your own soul and trying to pursue goodness as much as you're able to, you know, in your own thoughts and your own, you know, whatever, right? I don't know. Does that make sense?
I mean, you're practicing the virtues.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a way in which this quote would be applied to me as me being a bad person. Which election would it have been? One of the elections I didn't vote intentionally because I was like, I don't like anyone. Yeah. So I didn't vote. I could see this quote being the exact thing that people would use to be like, nope, evil one, because you didn't do anything. You didn't go out and you didn't vote. You're the one that decided you're going to do nothing.
Yeah. I've heard that actually said. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a huge degree where, like, I would want to fight against it, but I still don't necessarily know how. Where the position I'm taking is, nope, nothing was the best thing.
Mm-hmm. Which McIntyre actually contends a very similar thing with the recent elections. I think the last 3 or 4, he's like, nope, best way, the only way to win is not to play.
Right. But however, that's different than the answer we were giving before, where the answer we were giving before is something like, no, what you're doing is you're focusing on yourself and you're actually cultivating good virtues inside of yourself. So that way you can apply those virtues in the larger setting. Okay. That's not what I'm doing.
But I feel like it is what you're doing. Like, if we're talking about doing versus not doing, you first look to yourself. So, you know, you imagine, take any social issue. You look first yourself, and then it's not you look first yourself, then you go solve the issue. There's a lot of, you first look to yourself, and then you decide what your role is and what it means to be helpful. Because there's a lot of issues that it's like, yeah, best thing for you to do is not actually to engage with that every single issue in the world. And so it's kind of like you decide. So I do feel like maybe looking to yourself and then deciding, all right, is there somebody in this election that actually is enough better than someone else that it's like worth my time? Or is this just like, nope, they're all bad enough that I just don't want to put my name on it? Right? I mean, I don't think we've concluded that you necessarily go and do as active being dominant to negative. I think we reflect and then you decide how to go about in the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, a pacifist who thinks it is the virtuous thing to be a pacifist is going to be defined by what they don't do. The virtue in that case, I suppose the virtue would essentially be
like, for a doo-doo.
I missed it.
The virtue in that case would possibly be like courage, the courage to stand there with a gun to your face and not strike back. But it's still I would argue that that's still a distinct, you are not doing something. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean it's a vice. It's still very possible to be a virtue. So I don't think it can be necessarily characterized by it has to be the active act.
Well, so you're saying you're not taking an action, but
yes.
I don't know. And I'm not actually challenging that necessarily, but in what happens in my head is what I want to say is if you are practicing a virtue, you are taking an action.
In which case, I would say that you are practicing a virtue by not punching someone in the same way that you are practicing a virtue by not sending your ballot in.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to frame it in that.
Okay, sure.
Which virtue are you practicing by not voting?
Sending your ballot. That's a good question.
I definitely think that there is a humility and acceptance, right? We live in a society where we really believe that we determine things and control things. And so when you decide, all right, I don't think any of these options is going to bring me the ideal world, so I just kind of have to let the world be what it's going to be. I actually do think that there's a humility and an acceptance there.
Well, and also, okay, how about
diligence?
What?
Maybe diligence.
Diligence. I still don't know which word it would be, but what I formed in my head was a mental picture of, let's say you were picking the ruler of the world, but you were one of 10 people, right? And the other 9 were divided, and you chose to abstain, right? And the idea is I will not put power into the hands of either one of these people, and so it's I don't know what you would call that though. I'm
temperance. So yeah, Socrates and Plato in the Republic, they define the 4 main virtues for the philosopher king, which I just looked up: wisdom, courage, moderation, temperance.
Or prudence, wisdom. Yeah.
So maybe temperance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I like that because you're essentially as voters in the most powerful country in the world, we actually are all handing enormous amounts of power to people every 4 years, right? To a person every 4 years. And so that's, I think it's temperance to say I'm regardless of what happens, something's going to happen, right? I don't have control of the world, so I don't get to determine just what happens by myself, but something's going to happen, but I am not making a choice to give power to this person, regardless of whether or not they end up with power in the long run anyway, right? Yeah, I think temperance, in my understanding, I think that would fit.
I like that a lot.
To offer at least possibly a counterpoint, Father Zosima and Brothers Karamazov. So his, the statement that is pretty much the thesis of the book is that we would have paradise at once if we all acknowledged that we were obligated to each other. And that is a very active, and at least at surface level, not a very reflective looking inward, though we must remember this is coming from a monk who lives in a monastery.
So whole life looking inward.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think that's an important nuance to add, but there is, maybe you could just fall. I think you could just fall back and say, well, yes, the good person will realize that they are obligated to everyone, but only after they've become truly good. But
to the degree that that's not what he means, I would think that I like that quote and I love that book, but I think that reading it as a kind of a more definitive analytic proposition, I think it becomes ridiculous really fast when you think about how many people who did horrible, horrible things viewed themselves as obligated. And so I think that what we have to read into that is that Zosima is saying that something like the completion of this process to being the good person is the recognition of your obligations to others. And probably this is how people work, right? Whatever issue you're talking about, you talk about it as the only issue. I'm sure we could find 6 Zosima verses that talk about one issue as the paramount issue, That's not to say he's stupid or incorrect. That's just how people talk. That's how people work. So.
Fair point.
I was wondering if Father Zosim's quote also implies that that everyone would just kind of know what the exact right thing to do is at some point. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. That there's just like
I don't think it's that.
No, well, also, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just generally everyone knows what the right action actually is, right? We're going to have paradise once everyone realizes that we're have an obligation to one another. All right, so once I realize an obligation, we're all going to act always the correct way. We're always going to be good, and it's like it feels like it's a lot more difficult than that.
I think it would be something a lot more focused. Isn't the right word, but I mean he would go so far as to say, like, if you see a man homeless on the street, you are responsible. Like, he is there in part because you have not done your part. He got the idea from his brother who was dying of brain fever, and would he would apologize to all those around him. I mean, this is like maybe in kind of the trope of a holy fool or something like that, where like he would apologize to the birds for his having made the world a little worse, or like for whatever he had done to offend them, or something to that effect. So I mean, like and he's a monk, so in a very mystical way, he is very concrete about it. Like, no, you are obligated to everyone for their position, and if everyone would accept that, paradise would begin immediately.
And if I understand and remember correctly, now for however long, Stephen's going to be the one who read the book most recently, so he's going to be the authority, of course. So one of us has to read it quick. But from what I remember, and from the quote you just said too, right? It's not like be obligated to the world or like to some abstract concept of humanity or something like that. It's be obligated to one another, which doesn't solve all the problems, because it's definitely it's really hard sometimes to figure out and by doing this thing, am I enabling or am I actually helping, right? That's a hard question. However, I still think if you're only thinking in the context of when I kind of like what Kurt was saying earlier, that if I'm a human interacting with the world, humans are going to land on my lap, probably not literally,
you'd be surprised.
But that needs something, right? Or that need some sort of help, even if they can't articulate very well what exactly they need. And maybe I'm not wise enough to know the exact best thing to do, but still in that scenario, it's clear they need something from me. And if I am trying to understand love in some sense and trying to act that out, well, that it's complicated, but also not that complicated. And even not that hard to not mess up too bad, right? Even parents who suck as parents can oftentimes do decent jobs and raise decent kids just because they're trying, even though they're failing a lot. You know what I mean?
Well, and so Diego, I didn't know if you were kind of going this direction as well, but that very much goes to the point Zosa makes earlier in the book when he says how there tends to be a sharp distinction between people who love humanity and people who actually like people individually.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yeah, no, he makes that point. He says it really well. I don't remember the exact quote, but yeah, he basically says that when you end up loving the idea of humanity, you hate every individual man, and it tends to be that when you love each individual man, you tend to not so much love humanity as a whole. Making an obvious point that's no, you're supposed to actually like human beings themselves. It's fine that you're people suck, but when you actually run into the guy on the road, you treat him with love. And I mean, I do think that's very much at the heart of how modern people think. We think in big issues about big numbers of people, and so we're unable to be loving to actual individuals as we meet them.
Which is intriguing. So at work, having diversity and inclusion training and all that, my general response, whenever they say,
congrats on beating that too, Stephen. Sorry, I didn't say that earlier.
Sorry, what?
No, congrats on finishing that program. I don't think I mentioned that earlier.
Thanks. Yeah. Yep. I'm now fully brainwashed, fully on board apparently.
You got racist.
It's incredible. So you know how at summer camp they have you write down your sin on a piece of paper, and they did that.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
They literally had us write down something and then tear it apart. It was incredible. Like, guys, are you serious? We're all like, I'm like the youngest guy on my team. We're all like late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50-year-old men and women. We're doing this crap. Are you freaking kidding me? It was incredible. Oh, it's perfection.
Unbelievable.
But I remember like they have us put stuff on our core priorities that like we check in. Most of the time it's just practical stuff like I'm working on this piece of software and I'm going to be implementing the data model for it or whatever. So like very practical, still kind of, it's still a little bit more like bird's eye, not saying I'm going to be implementing this algorithm, but like this is the project I'm working on, this is how I'm going to do it. But they recently, I think about a year ago, said like you also have to have your diversity and inclusion stuff and like say what you'll be doing. And at first I like, when I had a little bit more cover from my boss, who, from what I can tell, is at least moderate Catholic or like devout Catholic and probably moderate, maybe center right. Probably moderate. And so like he didn't care. I could tell he didn't care. Like so my core priority for that was like I will treat every person with decency and respect, like unstated, like I have this entire time. Like this isn't anything new. And like my new boss is great. I really like him. He's a great guy. But like he was like, yeah, I mean like it's just not concrete enough. It's not like I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like this is absurd.
I will treat only minorities with dignity and respect.
Suck. But there is something
More
about
specific. I will treat one specific black person with dignity and respect.
I mean, like, I guarantee if I'm polluting, like I will commit myself to accepting LGBT and making sure that we have a minimum of one person, like, or whatever. It's like that would have flown completely by it because it's like it's a more high level abstract. I am serving this particular cause, and that's like all it turns into. I just find it a bit absurd how that works because yes, like if somebody who is a minority or is somebody who is LGBT or whatever, they come in like I'm going to treat them with dignity and respect. I've worked with plenty of minorities. I've worked with gay men. We're coders. We code like yeah. And so it's interesting how it does turn into an abstract practice rather than a concrete practice. That almost the abstract becomes more important.
Yeah.
Well, I've told you guys before about how that was at like University of Iowa Law School, where it was like the immigration stuff was so huge because of Trump, but yet we had all of these foreign lawyers that were like studying at the law school, who most of which were like extremely lonely and struggling to adapt to American society. Like really, a lot of them were in a really rough spot, and so like I remember just being blown away at how ignored they were, as well as how like there was a couple that I was close with, as well as they knew they weren't actually allowed to communicate any of their views, even amongst these people that in politics were so on their side. And it just was bonkers to me, like the degree to which it was like all these people like, you know, being out there being like, yeah, we hate, you know, these racist policies. We love immigrants. And it's like, well, not the ones that actually are near you. You just love the idea of immigrants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to, this would actually genuinely be helpful for me. And then maybe as kind of a, you know, like wrapping up my part of the topic, just because like literally a specific question entered my head that started this whole thing. And I would like to try to answer that for myself at least. So I want to just basically describe to you this this part of the episode of Seventh Heaven and ask you to help me decide if this is good or bad. So Reverend Camden is sitting at home. They're about to sit down to dinner. This pregnant girl walks in with his oldest son, who's about 16, and there's like, oh, they're all shocked. Turns out, yeah, it's not the son's kid. He's just helping her out because he like met her in the library and she was pregnant, and then the deadbeat dad isn't around, right? So, and then, you know, they welcome her in, she has dinner, whatever. Well, so later on, cut scene to Reverend Camden goes to the girl's house, and you found out during dinner that like her dad kicked her out, and then the deadbeat, you know, baby daddy isn't actually helping. So that's why, you know, like that's why the son was helping, because she doesn't really have anybody. So Reverend Camden goes to the dad's house, like her dad, and like knocks on the door. He opens the door, says, "Hi, I'm a friend of your daughter's." Slams the door in his face, and he kind of has this look on his face. Knocks on the door again. Dad opens the door. I don't know why the dad keeps opening the door, but Dad opens the door, and he says, "Hi, I'm Reverend Camden." Slams the door in his face. Right. This happens repeatedly in different forms, and eventually the Reverend leaves. Right. Some things happen, and then cut to this other scene where he like somehow tracks down, like stalks the address of the baby daddy, tracks him down, and like talks to him and says like, "You're gonna have a daughter, like I can help you get a job, like are you sure you don't want to be?" And he's never being like real forceful or real, even I would say real judgmental. He's more so like inviting, like going to these people and inviting them to be like better than they are, you know what I mean, or something like that, inviting them to do the right thing without like trying to throw it in their face if they're not doing it. And so he talks to the baby daddy. He ends up getting the baby daddy a job, and then the dad ends up her dad ends up coming around later too. So what my question is like, I could easily see, considering that being a Badinsky, right? I could easily see that like a busybody or getting involved that is in some place that is not your business. Like I think you could easily say he's doing the right thing if he's just like welcoming the mom in and trying to support her in ways that she needs and should give her, give her money or whatever she needs, right? Like, and he was obviously willing to do that, but he did these extra things that feel like, and even her dad actually says, like, "This is none of your business, stay out of it," right? Like, and he's kind of right, isn't he? Like, it's not his business. But also, there is a way in which, at least to me, it really feels like all of this fits under the category of taking responsibility for this human soul who entered his world without him going out and searching for it. You know what I mean? Like, she fell in his lap, so to speak, and like then he did these things. And I guess I don't know how to answer the question. Is he being a Badinsky? Should I not be like that because it's bad and I should let people mind their own business? Or like, if similar circumstances happen to me, should I also try to do like as much as he's trying to do and so forth? You know what I'm saying, right?
I think I would argue that part of that is a little bit of Hallmark painting over of reality.
Hallmark Channel, thank you. But also, no, it's not. It's not Hallmark. But no, that aside, though, I don't disagree with you. I think the question stands without that, though. Still.
Yeah, that's entirely fair.
So the verse in James when it says if anyone knows the good they ought to do and does not do it, it is sin. That's the quote where I'm seeing in this situation. Okay. Reverend Camden knows exactly what he needs to do or what he should be doing in these situations. So it's very easy for him to step into those roles and be like, I'm the guy that should be the go-between between the daughter and the father, and between the daughter and the baby daddy. She obviously can't do this on her own, so it seems necessary for me to do this. This is the good thing. I know what the good thing is. Therefore, it would be sinful for me to not do so because I'm in a position where it's right for me to do it. Where I personally struggle is if a similar situation happened to me, I'd be like, I don't even know what the right thing is. I would feel so incompetent to do the same things that Reverend Camden is doing. Yeah. And that's where it's like, it's not clear to me that for me, the right thing to do is that. But somehow it is for him. And when you tell the story and when I'm assuming I would watch the show, I'd be like, yep, he's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's what seems weird to me.
I think I'm inclined to agree with Liv. I think for that reason, but the thought I had as well was that unlike a lot of the scenarios in which we were discussing where things are just staying in abstract, like this is a concrete, he is given an opportunity to do something good. And arguably, he is getting involved in a piece of business that isn't necessarily his own. But then again, the daughter brought him in. Like, she said, I need help. Whether explicitly or not, she said, I need help reuniting with my dad and my baby daddy.
Yeah.
So I think I would contend that, like, that has become his business. Did
she ask?
A little bit of hand waving, but.
Did she ask for help finding the baby daddy?
You never heard her say that. No, and I think it's implied. I think it's implied more like the way Liv put it, that like maybe they had a conversation about it, but for the most part, it's just kind of he just like knows now this needs to happen.
And
So I wonder if this is. I wonder if this is a product of just like a movie where you have cutscenes. Because if you think about how that really should go, I do honestly think that the, kind of your orthodox don't be a Badinsky approach. Like, so he's helping her out, doing all these things. Obviously, they're going to be talking about long term. What's the game plan? Because I'm obviously have a family to take care of. I can't be your, quasi husband. And so she's like, well, I've got this baby daddy out there that somehow comes up. Okay, well, does he know about the baby? No. Do you know where he lives? What I mean? So, and then if she asks him, will you go with me or will you go for me? Then he's definitely not being a Badinsky. He's been asked to help her. So maybe all this happened. I think if he jumped the gun, I don't think it makes him an evil person. But I do think like if he just kind of met her, knew her as a neighbor, girl down the street has a baby born out of wedlock. I'm gonna Google, see if I can figure out who the father is, and go show up at that guy's door. I was like, yeah. Come on, man. Like, you jumped the gun. Get to know her, and if she asks for help, finding him help,
Well, then do you think it's still his responsibility to the point where if he didn't, it's a bad thing in that conversation, like picturing it more in a real-world scenario, to say, would you like me to go talk to, as opposed to just not saying it and waiting for her to ask. And if she doesn't ask, then you don't do, right? Like, are you supposed to offer the suggestions that you think might be a good idea?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Diego, because that's where the James verse comes in. That's he now knows the right thing, but if he doesn't do it now, it's sinful.
That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out.
And I mean, like, I think each situation is going to vary with that. I mean, if he just jumps in, especially without telling her, like, well, maybe the dad/boyfriend is abusive. Like, you don't know the full context, and so I am inclined to say with Kurt, like, yeah, get to know the person, like, try to figure out their situation, and if it becomes clear that there's been a massive communication breakdown, or there's been some hurt feelings that can be fixed, well then yes, maybe you are obligated to go in and help. But if it's like, no, the boyfriend was actually a drug dealer and she's way better off without him, well, like, maybe you shouldn't do that. But I would say that that's just where every single situation is going to vary. And so, yeah, don't do something unless you know that it is good. But once you know that it is good, then yes, you are sinning if you don't do that.
Well, there's also the other side of the pastor, right? So he, everybody has seen the pastor whose family ends up being a disaster because he only focuses on his ministry. So let's say there's just 1 million people that come to this guy with their requests, and he, in each situation, knows what would be best for that person. Well, probably if I did this. At some point, this is where I think the internal focus is so important, where he needs to acknowledge, I can't save the world. So I need to also balance myself and my family in this equation. And so, yeah, that's where it's like you kind of don't know, because like how many of these people is he dealing with at once?
Actually, to be fair to Reverend Camden, the show sets him up as a pretty good husband and dad too. So
right, of course, right. Well, which kind of implies that he doesn't have like 16 people he's doing this with at any one time. Which, like, for like an inner city pastor, there probably would be, right?
No, he actually is doing both things, which is to your point.
Probably just not real, yeah.
But like part of what I'm getting at too, and this is almost a bit of a confession thing, like in my social work job, I am regularly coming across things where it's like, well, I could offer this thing, but I'm not going to. And I honestly, every time that happens every day. And it's not like, it's not whereas like this person has a right to this thing. It's like a suggestion I could throw out there, or an idea, or a whatever. And even like the services that we provide, like our clients don't exactly have a right to it. And so there's this weird gray area where like we're theoretically supposed to be making sure our clients have their needs met, but also we're not supposed to be just throwing like every service we have at them, because we'd go under as a company doing that, And so we're always like balancing that. And so, but like every day I'm literally faced with that decision. Like, should I be, and not even in the service sense, even just in the like, would you like me to do this for you? Would you like me to call your doctor for you or something like that? Right. That question of like, am I enabling by doing too much for them or whatever? And to be frank, I tend to always gravitate towards, no, I don't want to enable. I'm not going to do it. But if I'm being honest, I'm just being lazy most of the time. You know what I'm saying? And I think I think sometimes that laziness is actually good for them, but I think there are other times where it's not, and that's actually what I'm trying to figure out for like my actual self in the real world.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I've heard that burnout rate for social workers is insanely high, and so
what excuse I use.
And I mean, so with that one, I don't think I'll walk back my claim, but I will say the old aphorism: "Don't let perfection be the enemy of good." If you are yes, maybe for half a year, you really could bend over backwards for every single one of your clients. And in some cases, maybe it would be good. From what I understand, that doesn't always turn out that way. But then after 6 months, you're burned out, can't help anyone else. And at that point, that's veering a little too close to utilitarianism for my liking. But I mean, there is the practicality of yes, you can help out a lot of people. And let's be real, we could us four, we could also be donating most of our paychecks and living on bare minimum. But then the paradox with that is then we become the people that need the money to be given to charity. And sometimes about the best you can do is do good where you can, and don't let perfection I can't do all I can. I can't do the absolute perfect amount of charity, or I can't do the absolute perfect amount of social work. Don't let that stop you from doing what you're doing, at least doing the good that you're doing.
No, sure. Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. Yeah. And I think the part that maybe I'm trying to motivate myself. So that was, I guess I didn't say that at the beginning, but this is obviously very personal for me. But just trying to motivate myself more to live like what you were. I keep pointing. You can't see me, but I'm pointing at you. To do what you were talking about. And I appreciate that verse that you keep quoting, right? The doing the good that you know to do, and then putting Peterson in there, the idea of the taking responsibility for what what actually is. Sorry, I'm just rambling now.
It's interesting. You mentioned kind of you're not sure if your clients may or may not have rights to this sort of thing, and kind of using that as your heuristic, which is, I mean, it's a heuristic, but I know McIntyre in After Virtue, one of his conclusions is that the moment you start using rights-based language, that's when you know that the moral conversation is over. That at that point you fall into these fundamentally undefinable concept where it's just you kind of hand wave and say they have a right to this. It's well, why? And so I think I would like Livingston's heuristic a lot more. Or not even a heuristic. That's more of a just nice tidy rule rather than the rights-based heuristic. Yeah.
Wait, what's the rule again? Sorry, can you summarize that for me?
Oh, if you know the right thing to do and don't do it, you're saying.
So I still really struggle with what is the right thing, though.
Oh, absolutely. I'm with you completely on that.
Yeah. Well, that's I guess beefing up the virtues, because if you're trying as hard as you can to beef up prudence, right? Reading really good literature. Trying to listen to men that you are pretty sure are or men or women, but people that you're pretty sure are not what that's recorded, Steve. That you're pretty sure are wise. Trying to beef up wisdom in the ways that you know how to do. Then yeah, I suppose. And then also probably consistently questioning yourself to some extent. Then you're probably gonna be on sort of the right track.
Yeah. Well, my thought would be. Maybe this is more practical than you want, Diego, but it was just a thought that I've always had. Whenever I feel I'm lost between I could do this or could do that, this is more short term, this is more long term. I think always the question in my head is, have I only done one side? Because if so, my motivation seems pretty sketch. So there's a lot of reason to think that maybe where you're at right now is pretty balanced. Maybe you're helping people to the degree you can without sacrificing your own spiritual development. Or maybe you could be doing more. We don't know the answer to that. Yeah. But if you've actually only done one, then there's if it's I did this month where I did a lot of these things for people, and I was never reading my Bible. I wasn't doing my prayers. It was bad for me. I became resentful. That'd be okay, well then maybe you need to dial it back. That'd just be my thought is maybe that's more practical than you want. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. But.
No. But it sounds a lot again, Peterson saying like pushing yourself to your limits. Like you're not actually sure how much responsibility you can take until you actually find.
Until you tried it. Yeah.
Back off a little bit. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
That's such a teeter-totter, not a horseshoe.
Dude, the teeter-totter. That's the new one. The teeter-totter, the horseshoe, and yeah.
What's the horseshoe?
So everybody always talks in balance nowadays. Like, whenever there's two things, people are just like, it's probably balance. It's like rape's not balance, guys. Like, first of all, some things are just dichotomies and you're just wrong. And like people just assume like there's two things you could do. Those probably balance. But also a lot of things are a horseshoe, which is like it's better to be on one of the sides. Just don't be in the middle. One common one we've thought, like so COVID, right? Social distancing. There's always an economic cost to trying to social distance. So either do it completely so you can actually stop the spread, or don't do it at all because all of the models say like kind of doing it's still going to spread more or less the same.
Yeah. So
it's like do it or don't do it because you're hurting. You know what I mean? Being a careerist is probably a horseshoe. Like dive into your career to get a lot out of it. But if you're like HR at some trucking company, like you kind of work to get there and that's your life, like you don't do other things because you're into your career, it's like that's probably like not good.
That was specific.
I don't know that this is true. I think Charlie had a thing with a girl once. That was that because that's him and I think he came up with it. But he always is like HR at some trucking company. But so the new one's the teeter-totter paradigm, which is that you're actually supposed to try both sides. Maybe that's just balance though, because you're just finding balance. I still think we should. We're claiming
with murder. I've tried not murdering people.
It didn't go well. I'll lead it into it.
Well, I think that was another one where horseshoes. Crime.
Oh, right. You either murder or don't murder someone, or you become a serial killer. But
definitely. There's no point in just murdering one person.
Yeah, absolutely.
At that point, you just gotta go for it.
You gotta go for it.
I'm glad that's recorded too.
No, but actually, in all reality, to understand organized career criminals, I think that actually that's 100% a true point. That like I think a lot of kids in certain neighborhoods realize very early on there's just two different worlds. And you can only live in one of them, right? And so it's kind of like maybe unhelpful to think of individual crimes and more helpful to think of the world as a place full of horseshoes.
Oh no! Oh no!
Oh, we lost.
Liv froze.
We're all froze.
No, just you.
Oh yeah, just you.
What?
Just you.
Oh, it's just me.
He's back.
He's back, ladies and gents.
I need to get going soon.
Yeah, I actually I've got the you guys are actually my my side hustle, my mistress on the side. I've got the podcast actually.
Wow.
Okay. Sorry,
no,
guys.
Seriously, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed talking about this. So thank you.
Yeah, no, Diego, thanks for putting the work in on the topic. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, this was good. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, man. I loved it. For next week.
Crucible?
Okay. If you guys can do that, that'd be awesome.
I should be able to look at it.
Let's do it.
So yeah, there's there's a video as well if you want to. I can give you guys the PDF and there's all the recordings, 2 times speed if you wanna.
Roger that. Sweet,
all
man.
right.
Looking forward to it.
And sorry, you said
no, go for it.
midway through before I'll send some kind of thing about how to frame the discussion of what I want to get out of the Crucible. Because there's the basic question I'm going with for my students is how do you stand in the face of evil? Something around that. Now,
you just can't do nothing.
I think you spit in it.
that's good.
Hey, news just came out that Whitmer is poised to extend it to May 15th. So that's significantly less time. That's less time than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be till the 28th, which is what the rumors were.
That's 3 weeks. That's doable.
But I would be hopeful because I think if they only gave her half a month, they're not likely to give her much more. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the Senate interaction is there, just to be clear. But so that's just what I got an email about.
No. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you, but also since Kurt started with 28, you helped that you did the I'm pregnant thing. Actually, we're just getting married, so that was helpful.
Classic.
That's good. Cool. All right, great to see you guys.
It's been a pleasure. See you next week.
Oh, Kurt, today's podcast, it's the first McGilchrist. We're doing the forward and the
nice.
preface in the forward and
No way.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. I've already done the forward, so I get that. Yeah.
Good. Awesome, man. I hope it goes well.
Yep. See you later, everyone.
For a while.
Yeah.